Tonight, the global trade war heats up as Donald Trump brings in steel tariffs. The Prime Minister warns that all options are on the table. Keir Starmer tells the Commons the US import duties are disappointing. Is he going to have to get tougher? In the Oval Office tonight, the US President's been attacking the EU and warned that he'll respond after it announced £22 billion worth of what it calls countermeasures. Meanwhile, Canada announced its own retaliation, tariffs on nearly $30 billion worth of US imports. Also tonight, European nations hold talks in Paris about sending troops to Ukraine if there's a ceasefire deal. And we'll also be recognising the role that women play right here in Westminster. All that and more with Nick Ferrari and Caroline Lucas, who'll be with us for the next hour. And don't worry, Nick, we are also celebrating that you are here in Westminster as well. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Tonight, we're talking tariffs, Donald Trump's favourite word. And in this instance, you can take him at his word. 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium imports to the US has taken place today. And that's just the start, with specific nations and goods also in his sights. Now, look, this is stating the obvious, but tariffs make things more expensive for consumers, but also for businesses. They make recession more likely and inflation almost a certainty. So you can see why countries around the world are worried. But how are they reacting? Well, here's Canada's outgoing Prime Minister a couple of weeks ago. Canada, of course, has been particularly hit by tariffs.
Even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
I mean, I think that's what you call playing hardball. They have responded with retaliatory tariffs, as has the EU.
Tariffs are taxes. They are bad for business and worse for consumers.
And here's Australia, also, of course, hit by those tariffs on steel and aluminium.
Such a decision by the Trump administration is entirely unjustified.
But what about the UK? Because up until now, Keir Starmer has been pursuing a different tack, keeping Trump close, trying for influence and special treatment. Remember that Washington trip? That was all smiles?
He was working hard, I'll tell you that. He earned whatever the hell they pay him over there. But he tried.
You see, that's why I was interested to hear a different tone from Keir Starmer in the House of Commons today. Let's just take a listen.
We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
All options on the table. So is this a genuine change of approach? Is Keir Starmer really keeping his options open for retaliatory tariffs? Look, it's too soon to tell yet. And it's also too soon to tell whether playing the bad guy or the good guy will yield the best results. Well, first, let's hear, shall we, what the President himself has been saying about tariffs. This is during a meeting with the Irish Prime Minister, Micheál Martin, in the Oval Office. Donald Trump also tonight hinted at financial pain for Vladimir Putin if he resists America's proposed ceasefire plan that's backed by Kyiv. Let's have a listen.
We have a full ceasefire if it kicks in. We have to see. It's up to Russia now. But we've had a good relationship with both parties, actually. And we'll see. We'll be knowing people are going to Russia right now as we speak. And hopefully we can get a ceasefire from Russia. And if we do, I think that would be 80% of the way to getting this horrible bloodbath finished. It's a bloodbath is taking place over there. Yeah, there are things you could do that wouldn't be pleasant in a financial sense. I can do things financially that would be very bad for Russia. I don't want to do that because I want to get peace. I want to see peace, and we'll see. But in a financial sense, yeah, we could do things very bad for Russia. It would be devastating for Russia, but I don't want to do that because I want to see peace. And we're getting close to maybe getting something done. We've got Ukraine done, and as you know, I've always said that Ukraine might have been the more difficult party. You were here a week ago when some interesting things happened. I had somebody that didn't seem to want peace. Now he's agreed to peace. So we'll see what happens. The European Union treats us very badly. They have for years. I saw that. I had it out with them in my first term. It did well, but we had to solve other problems, and we did. But European Union's been very tough. And it's our turn too. You know, we get a turn at that also, but they have not been fair. They sue our companies and win massive amounts of money. They sued Apple, won $17 billion, and they use that for other reasons, I guess, or to run the European Union. So I'm not knocking it. They're doing what they should be doing, perhaps, for the European Union, but it does create ill will. And as you know, we're going to be doing reciprocal tariffs. So whatever they charge us, we're charging them. Nobody can complain about that. Whatever it is, it doesn't even matter what it is. If they charge us 25 or 20% or 10% or 2% or 200%, then that's what we're charging them. And so I don't know why people get upset about that, because there's nothing more fair than that.
Our US correspondent Mark Stone joins us now. Once again, Mark, I feel like there's about 10 different news lines I could talk to you about when it comes to Donald Trump, whether it's tariffs, whether it is Ukraine, whether it's the EU. What stood out to you tonight?
Well, let's start with the moment, because we've seen so many of them, these Oval Office moments. And I got the sense watching the Taoiseach there that world leaders are beginning to work out how to play Donald Trump. Maybe play is not the right word. How to deal with these moments of huge jeopardy. We saw how disastrously it went with Volodymyr Zelensky. We saw how embarrassing and awkward it was for King Abdullah of Jordan. We've kind of seen the range, and I thought that the Taoiseach dealt with it quite well. He kind of let Trump say what he wanted to say. He clearly believed that much of it was not correct, whether it be on tariffs or specifically on the way Donald Trump is dealing with the Ukraine issue, or more broadly with the European relationship with America. He let him say all that, and then gently he corrected him on a few points. He wanted calmly and with respect to put his point of view across, not just the Irish point of view, but the EU point of view. Ireland, of course, a key member of the European Union. And I'm pretty sure that in every EU capital, they were watching this moment, because this was their person in the Oval Office, another moment, another EU leader there, putting their point across. And so, for example, on tariffs, he clearly disagrees with the fact that Ireland now has massive tariffs imposed on it by the United States. And he wanted to point out that, yes, it is true that under previous administrations, American pharmaceutical companies have moved to Ireland. Great for Ireland, rubbish for America. He accepts that Donald Trump is right on that point. But then he gently pointed out that Ryanair, one of Ireland's biggest companies, spends more than any other airline in the world on Boeing jets. So he's kind of just pointing these things out, and then watching Donald Trump's body language when these moments come up, when he is corrected on stuff. He either sort of looks surprised, like he didn't know that this was the case, or he looks like he doesn't really care, or sometimes he looks like he's not even listening anyway. So the body language for these hold tight moments in the Oval Office is always fascinating. On tariffs, yeah, I mean, he made the point that the tariffs are not good for Ireland and not good for the EU, to which Donald Trump's response was, look, the EU was formed to screw America. Clearly not true. The EU was formed out of the dust of World War II to maintain peace in Europe. We could talk about Ukraine as well, if you want to.
Okay, let's do it. I'm interested in what you've got to say.
Well, I mean, look, your opening remarks there about the way that Britain is trying to deal with all of this is really interesting. Not wanting to put on reciprocal tariffs, unlike the EU. I think that's partly because of Ukraine. It's partly because Keir Starmer sees himself, perhaps with good reason, to be some sort of a broker there, some sort of a person who can massage the Americans to get them more to the European position. And kind of linking back to Ireland, it was interesting that the Taoiseach brought up the Troubles in Northern Ireland, that long conflict, and made the point that we, the Irish, know a bit about peacekeeping. Again, gently reminding Donald Trump that, we've been here before, we kind of know how to deal with these things. Maybe we could have some input on this, speaking, I guess, from an Irish perspective, from an EU perspective, from a European perspective. I make that point because the Brits do not want to antagonise Trump. They're making a point of not doing that. Why? Well, because they believe that they have a stake in this as well. They were part of that peace process in Ireland. They have a view on this. One man I think is probably pretty key. Jonathan Powell, he is the National Security Advisor for Keir Starmer, a man at the heart of Labour governments for many, many years. And guess what? A man at the heart of the peace process in Northern Ireland who has been to Kyiv recently, who's here in Washington over the next few days. I think the UK thinks that he is a key part of this process. If Britain irritates America right now by putting on reciprocal tariffs, the chances of Jonathan Powell being listened to on a different issue, Ukraine, are slim to none. So that, I think, is part of the British strategy here.
So interesting. I was actually reflecting on Jonathan Powell. I feel like he is one of these people we're not talking about so much out in the open, but he's such a key player behind the scenes. I'll be awaiting your online profile piece on him soon, Mark, but thank you very much for bringing us up to speed from the latest from the White House. Now, Donald Trump may think that tariffs is the most beautiful word, but also world probably. But how has the UK responded to his trade approach? Well, here the government said it was disappointed, but it was focusing on a trade deal with the United States. Sky's deputy political editor, Sam Coates, has been looking at what the tariffs mean for the UK.
Making America great again by pushing up prices of foreign goods and that way getting punters to buy American instead. And Donald Trump does this with tariffs, otherwise known as import taxes. From 4 a.m. today, he slapped a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminium imports from anywhere, including Britain. President Trump, he's so unusual because he's more open than any US president that I can remember that tariffs are about politics as well as economics. It's his negotiating tactic of choice. His most beautiful world. And they get lowered if you do deals with him, and they get raised if you anger him, like Canada did. And remember that as we watch the EU trying to impress Trump over Ukraine days after taking retaliatory action against the US over these trade sanctions. But it does mean pain all round. Now, take the 250 million tonnes of steel that last year went from Britain to the US. Tariffs are levied on the £400 million of UK steel as it goes through US customs. Now, the 25% charge flows straight into the US Treasury coffers, for sure, but prices also go up. American firms can buy less, and in some cases there isn't a US alternative, so they hurt. But what does Britain do next? Well, not a lot. This morning, the business secretary issued a stern message, and this guy, Jonathan Reynolds, will head to the US next week for more talks. But what could we be doing? Well, this is how the EU reacted. 26 billion euros of tit-for-tat sanctions on all of these things and more. The list of goods targeted is 99 pages long. If we were still in the EU, we'd have to do all of this too, but we're not, and instead are hugging America close. Even if today, at Prime Minister's Questions, the Prime Minister wanted to look a little bit more open-minded.
We will take a pragmatic approach. We are, as he knows, negotiating an economic deal which covers and will include tariffs if we succeed, but we will keep all options on the table.
Two different approaches, the EU and the UK. So who's right? Well, let's be honest, this isn't about us. Look at this graph. We are, all the way over here, the 15th biggest exporter of steel to the US. Could the Prime Minister even fight this by retaliating? Now, the UK has gone down this path for a reason. Keir Starmer wants to remain a bridge between the US and Europe. He's decided to hug the White House close. They've punished us, but we're not hitting back, hoping this government remains trusted enough to do business with Team Trump. A big difference with Europe. But will Keir Starmer reap the rewards?
That's Sam Coates there. Well, in the last hour or so, we've also been hearing from European defence ministers who've been meeting in Paris to discuss Ukraine and rearmament. We can talk now to our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who joins us now. Tamara, what's been going on?
So the defence ministers of the E5, that's basically Europe's biggest 5 defence spending nations, so the UK, France, Germany, Italy and Poland, have been meeting to talk about what comes next if there is a ceasefire. And, of course, Ukraine and the US have agreed something. The US say they're going to put it to Russian officials as soon as tonight. Things seem to be moving quickly. Who is going to police this agreement? Who is in this coalition of the willing that the Prime Minister has talked about? And actually, there were some very interesting comments from some of the other defence ministers. John Healey was quite guarded. He said these are decisive days in the push for peace. We're going to meet again and talk further. The French defence minister went further, saying that 15 nations had expressed an interest in being involved in this coalition of the willing. We haven't heard that figure before. He made clear that this is some steps down the line, that, you know, we have to get a ceasefire first, and then there are negotiations, and then there are lots of different roles that these troops might need to play. They were all talking in their own languages. We did some quick translation work with some of the team here, and he was basically saying that the Ukrainians will need to do a lot of this securing any ceasefire deal themselves, so Europe will need to support them. But as for troops, he slapped down a question about numbers, but said that there were lots of countries who'd been interested in coming forward. And we know that Keir Starmer is hosting a virtual meeting this weekend of other European leaders. So it sounds like it's beyond 2 nations, the UK and France, who might contribute. We haven't got any firmer commitments. It sounds like Italy is definitely not joining a coalition of the willing. I think there was another interesting point raised here. John Healey, our defence minister, said that European allies will be working ever closer together. He said we need to rearm, we need to rebuild our industrial base. When the Chancellor was talking about increasing defence spending, it sounded very much about the UK. All the European defence ministers that talked about Europe together needing to rearm and rebuild our industries. So it'd be interesting to see over time how much the UK wants to be involved there, given that it's the UK and Europe very much saying Russia is still a threat and we need to be alert to it.
Interesting stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Tamara Cohen speaking to us there. Well, let's get a little bit more now on how the UK should respond to Trump's tariffs. I've been speaking to the chair of the Business and Trade Committee, that's Byrne. So we've heard from Donald Trump today, sitting there with the Irish Prime Minister. He said that the EU is set up to take advantage of the US, including Ireland in that as well. It does feel like things are escalating between the US and the EU, and that's going to be bad for us, even if we're not in the European Union, right?
Yeah, these are first shots in a trade war that nobody needs. It's actually bad for America. I mean, a lot of analysts have just downgraded the American growth forecast today. So this is helping nobody. And in fact, it's hurting American consumers and workers, like right now. So we've got to, I think, just try and de-escalate a little bit. And we've got to drive much faster now for a trade deal with the United States. But we've also got to redouble our defences for our steel producers here at home. And we have the steel companies coming in front of our committee on Tuesday to ask them exactly what help do they now need from government in order to protect their businesses, protect workers.
Yeah, you're obviously talking about the steel there because of these 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium being imported into the United States. You said what you're doing on your committee, but how should the UK react to that? Because we are seeing retaliatory tariffs from others, like the EU, for example.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, this is about £350 million worth of British exports, and those exports have just got £100 million more expensive. That is going to hurt American consumers because a lot of the steel that we ship is from specialist companies like Forgemaster to the US Navy. So their prices have just gone up, and it's going to be hard for them to find other suppliers that are as good as the product that they buy from Britain. So, you know, the Secretary of State is right to reserve the right to retaliate, which is what he's done today. But we've actually just got to make sure that we drive harder on a bigger free trade deal with America now, in which we can then get these tariffs knocked down. But in the meantime, to guard against the risk to UK firms, we're going to need to really understand what they need in order to get through this, because the US is the second biggest market for these companies.
I mean, you say there, though, that, you know, the Secretary of State is right to keep retaliatory tariffs on the table, which is what we saw, you know, Keir Starmer say. But there's an awful lot of people who think, you know, he's got to be a bit tougher than that, because it does feel like the UK has been just, I guess, less bullish compared to the EU, compared to Canada on this. I mean, you could argue that's a good idea, you know, keeping Trump close is good, but then it hasn't really worked in terms of getting as any exemptions so far.
Well, I don't think the UK government should shoot from the hip right now. You know, so they have got a whole game plan for how to escalate retaliatory tariffs. But we have also got
So they do have a game plan,
They've definitely got a game plan, but...
They've worked it out, you think, already?
We've got this kind of unique possibility of getting a deal done with America because, unlike Europe, our trade with the United States is actually quite balanced, and a lot of it for the UK is actually in services rather than goods. So we shouldn't compromise, we shouldn't kind of disable our chances of getting that trade deal done, because actually that's a much bigger prize. So let's just kind of be a bit strategic about this.
How big a prize is a US trade deal? Now, that might sound like a stupid question, right?
Yeah.
But what the reason I'm asking
No, it's a good question.
is people say, if we are going to have a US trade deal, we're going to have to make all sorts of compromises. Donald Trump is going to make a trade deal that benefits the United States, not us. And there's lots of stories about chlorinated chicken and stuff like that. Do we even want a US trade deal?
So I think it depends on how many sectors it covers. So a US trade deal could be really good for a lot of our steelmakers, for example. So a trade deal would get those tariffs back down. It could be really good for tech. It could be good for artificial intelligence. It could be good for the sectors where we're particularly strong. I don't think there's going to be like a traditional free trade deal that covers all things for all people, because agriculture is really hard to get agreed between the UK and the US. And actually, we've got to start looking after our farmers. But we can't, I don't think, jump into retaliatory tariffs right now because it risks undermining that bigger prize.
I'm interested in your view as chair of the Business Committee, because, you know, look, you're a Labour MP as well, but you're also the chair of this committee, and committee chairs, I guess, have kind of a proud parliamentary history of holding the government to account, of being independent, non-partisan. So, hand on heart, what do you make of the government's decision to increase the employer's contribution to national insurance?
So I've written a book about this. I've said that there were different tax options that were available. And, for example, if you take capital gains tax, or let's take a specific example. Let's look at Rishi Sunak's tax return. Rishi Sunak makes $2 million a year. He pays 23% tax because he gets a lot of his income from things like capital gains tax. So I said, well, look, we should be coming up with a better balance of tax. And crucially, we should perhaps have thought about doing our growth plan, our industrial strategy, before we were making some of these other changes.
So are you basically saying that they should have spread it rather than just doing so much on one particular tax?
So personally, that was my advice. And, you know, I've said in Parliament and elsewhere that doing the growth plan before making some of these other changes would have been sensible. Because, look, what most businesses say to us is, look, we can get behind what you're doing on national insurance and employment rights and minimum wage, but we need to know where the growth plan is. What's been really striking, and we've asked so many people this, is that business say, look, we can become the fastest growing economy in the G7, but we've got to have that plan for growth. We've got to start leaning into the sectors where we're particularly strong. That plan, as far as we understand it, has been delayed to the summer. I think that's a mistake. I think actually we should be pulling that plan forward and making it really clear to business about where the growth opportunities are going to come from. You
spend an awful lot of time talking to businesses. From those conversations, has that rise in employers' national insurance led to job cuts?
I don't think it's led to job cuts, but it's definitely led to a number of businesses thinking twice about the investment plans they're making for this year and the employment plans that they're making for this year. I think
future jobs, basically.
Yeah, and I think they haven't taken a final decision yet until they see what the industrial strategy looks like. Think about what that could include. It could include new ways in which we use the power of public procurement to completely change the kind of demand for British products. Lots of governments have been talking about buying British for a long time. This plan promises to really do that. If you can couple that with bringing down energy costs, investing in skills, building regional transport infrastructure, you've got a business plan for Britain which is there for the taking. And, you know, the thing that's surprised me most, actually, is that the amount of consensus we hear from across business and trade unions and consumer groups about the 5 or 6 things that we need to get right. The consensus is there for the taking. People kind of agree on what the business plan for Britain should look like. We just kind of need it on the table now.
OK, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I just wanted to show you some pictures that we've got coming in from the Kremlin. Now, these are of Vladimir Putin, who's been visiting the Kursk region for the first time since it was attacked by Ukraine. We're also hearing via Russian news agencies that Vladimir Putin visited a control centre that's been used by Russian forces, and he also heard a report from Russia's Chief of the General Staff, who told him that Ukrainian troops in the Kursk region were now surrounded. They also reported Putin said that Russian forces should completely, in his words, liberate the region from the Ukrainian troops as soon as possible. Now, at the same time, we've been hearing from Ukraine's top army commander, who says that Russia is trying to oust Kyiv troops from the region and also to move fighting into Ukrainian border territories. But those are latest pictures coming in from the Kremlin. Right, let's bring in our duo for the evening, shall we? The broadcaster, Nick Ferrari, and the former leader of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas. Great to have you both with us. I mean, it's another day of big, significant news coming out of the US. Caroline, how do you think Keir Starmer should be responding to these tariffs?
Well, I think perhaps he could have been a bit more bullish, to be honest. I think that the EU line probably makes sense. I mean, I know I heard Liam Byrne saying you shouldn't shoot from the hip, but in fact the EU isn't doing that. They're saying that from April they would bring in these extra tariffs if they haven't already seen Trump back down by then, which is, of course, is perfectly possible given the number of times he changes his mind. But I think what really worried me was this idea that the reason that we're holding off is for this great big trade deal that's in Liam Byrne's mind, but perhaps that's the only place it is, frankly, because I don't think the US is that interested in doing a trade deal with us. They certainly weren't interested in doing it last time around. And even if they were, I think we need to be careful what we wish for, because I think you were absolutely right that agriculture would form a major part of it. They want access to our markets, and we've got to be really careful about our farmers who are already having a really, really hard time. There's also the issues, as you hinted at, with chlorinated chicken and all the kinds of different regulatory frameworks that we have between much stronger animal welfare, for example, and environmental standards in the UK compared to what we have in the US. And so there could be something very dangerous about going down that road in terms of what that would mean for our agriculture, for our NHS even. And it would also have implications, of course, with our biggest market, which is the EU, because if we start trying to change our regulations in order to fit in with the US, in other words, weaken them, then that may well have implications for our relationship with the EU and the chances of trying to get a veterinary agreement with them. Frankly, that EU trade agreement is far more important in value terms than the one with the US. So I think there's a really uncomfortable trade-off that Starmer seems to be doing here.
What's your reflections on this, Nick?
Oh dear, Starmer the charmer it was last month, and now it seems all the president's yesterday men, isn't it, all honesty? So much for this bridge, a bridge too far. But I don't know why people go on about chlorinated chicken, right? I have eaten chicken. I've had some of the best chicken meals I've ever had in my life in the United States, and it doesn't appear to have done me any bloody harm. People go on
well, some people might disagree with that.
On and on about... currently, I'm not close to death's doors, or at least that's not what my doctor tells me. Why do people worry about chlorinated chicken? Americans eat the bloody stuff all day long.
It's not necessarily about your health. It's about the fact that it means that they can cram even more chickens in to very, very tightly packed sheds, which are not good for animal welfare, as well as not being good for
why is that
spread of disease
chlorinated
and so on.
then? What's going on
because
there then?
You chlorinate them in order to get rid of the germs and everything else that they've got, precisely because they've been pushed together. So this is about animal welfare as well as about human welfare. But the point is, chlorinated chicken is just one example. Let's focus on the issue here.
Well, no, I don't see Americans routinely dropping dead in the streets of New York and Chicago and Washington from eating chlorinated chicken. They seem to somehow survive. Why are you so worried about it? Chlorinated chicken might be quite good.
You know what? I'll be honest, my Politics Hub bingo card, I did not think this impassioned debate about chlorinated chicken would be...
Everyone goes on and on about. I don't think it's a problem.
I guess there is a symptom, Nick, though, of something bigger.
Is there an issue there about the trade deal where, like, look, if we sign any old trade deal with the US where they get everything they want, we could do that tomorrow, probably.
I mean, this may be, and God above, and I'm sure Caroline, we don't want to bring the B word, as in Brexit, into this. Is this actually an opportunity? Because obviously with the United Kingdom, as Sam Coates just said, standing away from the European Union, and we know that Sir Keir is, I don't use the word desperate, because he's right to try and be the statesman that builds the bridge. Is this actually an opportunity? Plus, of course, we've got the invite from the King for Trump to come over, which seemed to... I mean, this is ruled by...
That didn't go well, did it?
Well, this is ruled by chaos, isn't it? I mean, it is extra... They must have... The executives in the White House must have whiplash, because one minute we're going that way, the next minute we're going... It must be exhausting working over there.
But surely they would have expected that offer of the state visit would have meant that we weren't meant to have these tariffs that are just coming down on us as well. So I think that just needs to remind everybody that dealing with Trump is, you know, like dealing with Quicksilver. I mean, you can't possibly trust him from one hour to the next. And so it really worries me if we're trying to design our own strategies, assuming that Trump is in any way consistent, logical, or has a bigger view other than just what's good for him at that particular moment in time.
Well, the state banquet, obviously, with the King is going to have to be the finest smoked salmon from Scotland and chlorinate. You know where I'm going. You know what the main dish has to be. We know that. And that'll make the president very happy.
But the serious point here is about our farmers, and the serious point, and I do seriously worry that if we have agriculture as a major part of a new big trade agreement with the US, it could be absolutely devastating for our
Caroline, do you not
farmers.
think it's just sabre-rattling by Trump, in all honesty? Do you not just think he does this because he just wants a reaction? And then, as we see normally, he backs down and they gives another month and whatever it might be. No?
You might well be right, in which case the EU line is entirely rational too, because they're basically saying, OK, two can tango, we can do that. We're not going to implement them until the 1st of April, so we give him a bit of time to see whether or not he's going to back down.
Interesting stuff. Thanks both very much indeed. You're watching the Politics Hub coming up. Downing Street hopes to win over backbench MPs concerned by expected reforms to the welfare system. We'll have all the details. That's next.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kiev, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a 5th Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Seagal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West.
Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News?
Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, who was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast, starting now. It's very exciting. Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Hello, welcome back. Well, back here in Westminster, there's unease among backbench MPs about expected reforms to the welfare system. Every single Labour MP, all 404 of them, have been called to Downing Street to attend a welfare roundtable, which, I'll be honest, it's a pretty strong hint that Number 10 are a bit worried about this. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is here. What do you think the sense is among the Labour backbenchers then?
Well, it used to be beer and sandwiches in Number 10. It's been biscuits this afternoon.
That's disappointing.
Posh biscuits too. MPs who've been there this afternoon, and some will go back again tomorrow, have been reporting that they were given, wait for it, apple crumble biscuits and stem ginger and dark chocolate biscuits.
Oh.
So that's a sign, I guess, of how worried Number 10 are. But the serious point is, of course, that, as we saw at Prime Minister's questions today, and don't forget the Prime Minister had to go to the Parliamentary Labour Party meeting on Monday evening to talk about these expected cuts in welfare. Yes, of course they're worried. Remember the controversy over the winter fuel allowance. A lot of MPs are saying, "Oh, this could be as bad as that." Now, in the Commons today, PM was tackled by a few MPs, and also Ed Davey. He started off by saying, "I come from a family that dealt with disability through my mother and brother over many years." Now, he was tackled by Ed Davey, and then came this exchange with, OK, an MP will say is one of the usual suspects, Richard Byrne. But listen to this exchange between the PM and Richard Byrne during Prime Minister's questions today.
When politicians talk about tough choices, it means the easy option of making the poor and vulnerable pay. So instead of cutting benefits for disabled people, wouldn't the moral thing to do, the courageous thing to do, be to make a real tough choice and introduce a wealth tax on the very wealthiest people in our society?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the party opposite left a broken welfare system which locks millions out of work. That is indefensible, in my view, economically and morally. Of course, we need to support people who need support. We need to help those who want to work to get back into work, and I think there's a moral imperative in that. He talks about a wealth tax. We have raised money, the energy profits levy, taxing non-doms and air passenger duty on private jets. But this isn't a bottomless pit, and we must kick-start growth to get the economic stability that we need.
So, a wealth tax, Richard Byrne was. The PM was saying there, wasn't he? We've taxed non-doms and so on. It's worth repeating, of course, Richard Byrne was one of those MPs who lost the whip over, do you remember the rebellion on the two-child benefit cap? Now, when there's going to be a vote on this in Parliament, who knows? I mean, there are suggestions. They were going to. Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, is going to announce it this week, but a lot of bad publicity over the weekend has delayed it. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, we did a piece on this at the weekend where we interviewed a blind person with a guide dog, and what they were really concerned about was these PIPs, as they're called, the personal independence payments, which disabled people say give them a bit of independence. The person we interviewed was using Braille technology and so on, and a lot of MPs are very concerned about this. Is it just the usual suspects? Well, I reckon when it comes to a vote, they'll probably vote against. But there is unease amongst other MPs. I mean, for example, there was a new MP, Mr. Slinger from Rigby. His first name is John Slinger, just after the exchange with Kemi Badenoch. He was talking about support, compassion and so on. And so there is unease amongst not just the usual suspects, and the fact that they're all pouring into number 10 for their Earl Grey and posh biscuits, chamomile or whatever they get these days, shows just how concerned number 10 are. Big meetings today, big meetings tomorrow as well.
We'll have to see if they have to upgrade the Earl Grey to beer next time to really get them over the line. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig speaking to us there. Well, I'm sure concerns about the government's benefit reforms will feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Times' chief political correspondent, Aubrey Allegretti, and the Daily Mail's Whitehall editor, that's Claire Ellicott. Right, let's chat again to Nick and Caroline, shall we? Nick, what do you make about these welfare reforms? Is it a difficult choice that Keir Starmer had to make, or is Richard Byrne right?
It is a difficult choice, but it's the right choice. I have some chicken nuggets of wisdom that I've actually done some research for here. So fairly soon, currently we have 5.95 million, all but 6 million people who are supposedly too sick to work. By 2028, which respectfully is almost like the day after tomorrow, that will be 1 in 12 people in this country are unfit to work. The work capability assessments, 66% of them are done by phone, 13% of them are done by paper. There will be people watching this who we genuinely need to look after, and they will have relatives who we genuinely need to look after. This cannot continue. It's £265 billion a year, excluding state pensions, that we are paying this. Sir Keir, I'm so sorry. Sir Keir is absolutely right to tackle this. He'll suffer a lot of pain, he'll suffer a lot of ugliness, but it has to be done. We are spending almost 3 times what we do on education and 6 times what we do on defence on this. It can't continue.
Caroline, what do you think?
Well, it is a huge amount of money, but I think the conclusion we should draw from that is that something has gone horribly wrong with health of people in this country, and 14 years of austerity and the fact that the NHS has got these huge waiting lists and the fact that there's an epidemic of mental health problems. I don't think we should necessarily jump to Nick's conclusion, which is that notwithstanding what he said about some people we have to help, the absolute implication, though, is that there's a hell of a lot of people that he thinks are on the scrounge.
Yes.
I don't think that is, generally speaking, the case. I think that it is a really weak, cowardly decision to try to make sure that we get the money from some of the most vulnerable people in our society. I heard Nick exclaim with some annoyance about the idea of Richard Bergen's wealth tax, but I think Richard Bergen is absolutely right. He feels that it's totally unconscionable, really, that we would try and take money away from some of the most vulnerable people rather than levy a wealth tax, which they have in plenty of other countries and which could raise a reasonable amount of money on a very small proportion of people. So it seems to me that if we want a fairer society, if we really want to tackle this issue, the idea that there's some kind of moral mission, which is, I think, so insulting and so offensive, but that's how the Labour leadership have actually framed this. There's a moral mission, they say, to try to cut benefits that are actually about trying to get people back into work as well. That just seems to be absolutely wrong to me.
Caroline, I respect you, I respect your position, but what I find insulting and offensive is that there will be many people watching this show who go out and they work damn hard and they put in a shift at jobs they probably don't like very much and they pay their taxes. And some, not all, some of the people who are then claiming the money could quite easily go out and join the working population. And that is the reality, Karen. I'm not saying all for a moment. Indeed, in my world, I'd probably try and look after those who have genuine disabilities even more. But there are people who are milking the system, and you have to be alive to that.
I'm not denying that there will be a tiny number who are doing that, but what you're doing is basically suggesting you're going right back to George Osborne and those horrible statements that he made at the time that while you're going out to work, then the blinds are down in your neighbour's house because they're still asleep. And other people pointed out quite rightly the reason the blinds are down is because that person has been cleaning his office overnight while he had a very nice night's sleep. So I think this idea of dividing and ruling is just so damaging.
Can I ask, because part of the increase is down to mental health, right? And you say about something going wrong in society. Is there an argument that the structure of work helps people with mental health? It's a genuinely open question. I don't know what you think on it.
I didn't fully understand what you meant.
So what I mean is that...
The best cure for mental health issues is to go to work, Caroline.
If you can.
To have the workplace.
If you can, of course, but there are some people
But we should do everything we can to end... Because the minute we get him or her into an office or a factory or whatever, we are helping their mental health. It's
why
a proven
does taking money away from them help them in that situation? Well, that's exactly what Sir Keir Starmer is talking about.
And I never thought I would say this. This is where actually job coaches, something like that, can be positively beneficial. Because when you move a man or a woman into a place of work, you will find, in many instances, not all, their emotional health will improve. It's a fact.
That's not in doubt. But what is in doubt is the idea that you're going to cut money from them across the board in a way that's going to mean that huge numbers of people are going to suffer more. You don't need to cut money from people to send a work coach in to help people with mental health problems get back into work.
Do you feel like Keir Starmer's betrayed people here?
I think he's betrayed people who are disabled. I think he's betrayed a lot of people who voted for the Labour Party, not expecting them to do exactly what George Osborne was doing with his austerity agenda. That same wording, that if you can work, you should work. Yes, you should, but the framing of this is all about trying to divide the worthy ill from the people who are somehow on the scrounge. And I think that everything that Nick has said is just reinforcing that divisive way of looking at our fellow people.
I've watched you in Parliament for years and I admire what you've done. You cannot think it's right. We spend more on this than we do on health. We spend 3 times what we do on education. We spend 5 times what we do on defence. For the love of God.
Causes. No, I'm not suggesting that it's a great thing that we're spending this amount of money. Of course it's not. But look at the root causes. The idea that you just cut the budget is fundamentally wrong. Look at the fact that there's over 1 million people still with long COVID that we're not properly dealing with. Look at the fact that there are huge NHS waiting lists we're not dealing with. There are mental health problems, not dealing with them. Let's address those at source.
I genuinely could listen to this debate for a lot longer, and I get the sense that both of you could keep it going for a lot more as well.
Easily.
But we are
What do you
out of
want?
time. Thanks both very much indeed. Now, Sky News, the daughter of the MP apologies. I am not exactly sure what I'm talking about. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk over here, I'm going to talk to John Craig, who I think has got some breaking news for us now. It's about that man. It's about Jonathan Reynolds, because apparently we've had an apology from the Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, and John Craig can tell us more.
Breaking news from the Commons chamber. In the last couple of minutes, MPs have just voted through the Employment Rights Bill. Big cheers from Labour MPs, cleared the Commons now. And then up gets Jonathan Reynolds to raise a point of order. I thought, oh, is this going to be something new about tariffs? No, it was an apology over his what should we say, his rather dubious claims about a legal career many years ago. This is what Jonathan Reynolds had to say immediately after the vote on the employment bill, when most of the MPs had left the chamber. How sneaky is that?
Madam Deputy Speaker, on a point of order. It has come to my attention that in a speech I gave on the 28th of April 2014, recorded in column 614 of Hansard on the subject of high-speed rail, I made a reference to my experience of using our local transport system in Greater Manchester when I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. I should have made clear that specifically, Madam Deputy Speaker, that was a reference at the time to being a trainee solicitor. This was an inadvertent error, and although this speech was over a decade ago, as it has been brought to my attention, I would like to formally correct the record, and I seek your advice on doing so.
An inadvertent error. I mean, it's a speech in 2014, a long time ago, but he's been pilloried in recent weeks over this. And what he actually said was, in that speech, I have it here.
I love it.
Before the last election, I worked as a solicitor in Manchester city centre. Well, no, he didn't. He was a trainee solicitor. We used to call them article clerks, didn't we? Do they still call them that? I'm not sure. Anyway,
I've never heard of that.
He never qualified as a solicitor.
There you go.
And now he's come clean, albeit when most MPs had left the chamber after a big vote.
Love it. John, thank you very much indeed. John Craig, bringing us the very latest on that apology from Jonathan Reynolds. Now, the daughter of the MP, Sir David Amess, has described the outcome of her meeting with the Prime Minister as disappointing. Katie Amess, who was on this programme on Monday, she gave a very moving interview that stayed with me all week. She met with Keir Starmer at Downing Street earlier, following calls for a public inquiry into her father's murder being rejected on Monday.
Obviously, it's disappointing because I was praying that the full public inquiry would be launched. And when I asked questions about why it can't be launched, he wasn't really able to answer them. He just said that my case was different to Southport but couldn't tell me how. So that's very disappointing. But he said we can have a small glimmer of hope and hopefully some of our questions can be answered. Those that aren't answered, we can come back and speak to him about. It just prolongs the heartache that we're going through. Obviously, the best possible scenario would have been a full public inquiry, but I guess we have to cling to that 1% hope that we can get the answers through a different means. And if we don't get those answers, maybe then they'll reconsider.
Well, this comes after there were pleas in the Commons earlier today for the Prime Minister to reverse the decision on rejecting a public inquiry.
I plead with the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to deny the family a public inquiry despite similar inquiries being held into other tragic instances. So, will he please stop this shameful saga and heed the call of the Amess family for a judge-led public inquiry into David's death and the related failure of the Prevent programme from a heartbroken family?
Now, Sky News has caught up with the Labour MP Chilip Siddiq as she faces claims of corruption in Bangladesh.
Are you concerned about torture allegations involving your arts, Chilip Siddiq? Have you been contacted by Bangladesh authorities? Are you concerned that your aunt has been involved in torture?
Our political correspondent Rob Powell's been following this story. He's with us now. Rob, what can you tell us?
So this is related to some reporting that we did last week. Our colleagues over in Asia spoke to the current leader in Bangladesh, the interim leader, who basically said he believed or suggested that Tulip Siddiq still had questions to answer, still had wealth he believed tied up in the country. Since then, we've been trying to get to her to ask those questions directly, not very successfully, and she didn't want to answer the questions publicly there either. Of course, she resigned earlier this year as Treasury Minister after being caught up really in some corruption investigations going on in Bangladesh. It's all about the links between her and her aunt, who used to be the Prime Minister there, fled to neighbouring India in August last year after deadly protests. Now there is a lot of work going on to figure out what exactly happened when she was in power. And one part of that are these allegations that Tulip Siddiq may have benefited from this alleged grand corruption. We also revealed that some UK-based investigators were looking at scoping out whether they could play a part in some of these investigations too. It should be said, a spokesperson for Tulip Siddiq did reply saying that she denies all of the allegations, that she hasn't been contacted by the authorities in Bangladesh or indeed in the UK either.
OK, thank you very much indeed, Rob Powell, giving us the latest there. Still to come on the Politics Hub. A celebration of women in Westminster. We'll take a look at the 100 women recognised for their impact and achievement in politics and public life.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, the children's home that was run like a cult. We have a special report for you as more than 40 former students come forward with allegations of abuse. Plus, we'll have the amazing story of Jonathan Bryan, the non-verbal author whose mum taught him to read and write with his eyes. He's now campaigning for all children to be afforded the same opportunities. And we'll take you to the village in Hertfordshire that's being terrorised by a bird of prey. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, Westminster gets a lot of flack, sometimes rightly. But after working here for nearly 20 years, there are also, I should say, lots of inspiring men and women that work here despite the reputation. And today, some of the women have been recognised in the annual Women in Westminster list by the House magazine that celebrates the work of 100 women who they say have led the way over the last year. So, on your screen now are the 100 women who've been recognised from across Westminster. So they're parliamentarians, they're journalists, civil servants, campaigners, people who work behind the scenes, and so on. But there are also a few familiar faces on the list that I thought we should try and highlight tonight. So, our very own political editor, Beth, Rigby, who you probably recognise, and also our acting head of politics, Katie Dillon, who you probably don't recognise, but I can tell you she is an absolutely central part of our operation here in Westminster. So the magazine says Beth always cuts through the political bluster to get to the heart of the issues that matter, which is definitely something we're familiar with here on Politics Hub. But look, I'll be honest, it's particularly nice to recognise some people off-screen as well, because it is not just about the on-screen lovies like me and Beth, as the magazine says. Katie is passionate, rigorous, energetic and savvy. They say she's the definition of added value. Plus, today's panellist, former leader of the Green Party, Caroline Lucas, also recognised, described as a towering figure in environmentalism and progressive movements, which I think we've seen already with the debate on chlorinated chicken and benefits as well. Congratulations, Caroline.
Thank you very much. That's very lovely of you. Thank you.
It's true. It's good to be part in it. Do you think it's important, stuff like this, to kind of recognise women in Westminster? Do you think we've got somewhere to go?
I really do. And I think you made a great point as well about the fact that it's also people who are kind of behind the scenes.
It's important, yeah.
Because none of us get to be where we are without all of them doing such a hell of a lot of work behind the scenes. So I think that's amazing to get that properly celebrated. And, you know, let's face it, Westminster is still pretty male-dominated. It's changing, but it's pretty good to get those women really in the spotlight, I think.
I will genuinely be guided by you two folk because...
Really?
I'm going to take a note of that.
Okay, let's go write this down. Get you to sign it.
Why do... You are equals. You should be treated as equals. And I'm asking you, do you think we need this? Because I think it almost is, oh, aren't the women doing well? And I just want to treat you as utter equals. And I just, do you see the argument I'm saying?
No, I do.
And we shouldn't need these lists. You should be treated on your own merit.
Maybe you guys should make your own list.
But that's what I'm asking. That's what I'm asking. Do you see what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying, but I think in my time, 14 years in Westminster, there have been plenty of times when I feel that I have been treated differently and less well because I'm a woman. And so I still think we've got work to do.
I would say, genuinely, things have improved a lot. Like, I do think that. I joined the lobby, when was it? It must have been 2010-ish, 2009, 2010. And things then were quite bad, actually. You did feel like a bit of an outsider.
Yeah. I take it you're on the list.
I am on the list, yes. But I'm just trying not to sound like
RTS winner and on the list. I just want to get that out there, Sophie. I think we do need to...
You can come again, Nick, don't worry. Great to have you both on the programme.
Congratulations, by the way. Well done.
That's it from us tonight. I will see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah, Jane, me. I'll see you tomorrow.